I'm Doug Strong. I'm the Dean of the School of Theology here at SPU, and I want to welcome everyone here, faculty, staff, students, and especially any guests that we have on campus. Thank you very much for attending. This is a great evening for us. Annually, or almost annually, Theology sponsors the Palmer Lectureship, which is our opportunity to bring distinguished theologians onto our campus. And we get to hear some folks who might provide some voices that would challenge us, encourage us, help us to think in new ways. And we're particularly grateful to be able to do that this evening. Introducing our speaker tonight in just a moment will be Dr. Daniel Costello, Associate Professor of Theology, who is friends with our speaker tonight, and so we'll be able to introduce him not only as a colleague and a great theologian, but also in a very personal way. So we're glad for that. And I thank Dr. Costello for really encouraging this invitation, and also for all those from the School of Theology, including our staff who've helped to make this possible. But as we begin this evening, want to remember that it is the beginning of the Lenten season, and as we do so, let's open our time in a time of prayer. Gracious God, we come to you this evening with grateful hearts, remembering the ways in which we see you active in our world and in our lives. We remember with sadness the ways in which in our own lives we have failed to meet all that you would have us to be. We see it in our lives, we see it in our university, we see it in our world. For all these things we do ask your forgiveness and pray that we would be on a road to repentance, especially as we think about all that you have done for us through your Son's death. Lord, we pray that even this season may be a time of thinking, praying, discerning. And in that light, we give to you this evening. We thank you for voices that encourage us and help us to see things in fresh ways. We thank you particularly for our speaker this evening, and ask your blessing on him and this talk and our hearts as we open up to hear what you would say to us. For it is in Christ's name that we pray. Amen.
Good evening. It is my great honor to introduce Seattle Pacific University's 2016 Palmer Lecturer, Father Eduardo Fernandez. Father Fernandez is Professor of Pastoral Theology and Ministry at the Jesuit School of Theology at Berkeley, Santa Clara University. A Jesuit priest, Father Fernandez has degrees in sociology, Latin American studies, and theological studies, having taken his doctorate from the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome. He is one of the leading Latino theologians of today, as evidenced by his past role as president of the Academy of Catholic Hispanic Theologians of the United States. He has published a number of books on Mexican-American Catholicism, culture-sensitive ministry, and sacramental theology. I came to know Father Fernandez in a Wabash colloquium dedicated to supporting Latino and Latina religious studies faculty from across the country, and we met over a 2-year period, and Father Eddie, and that's how we came to call him, and that says something a lot about him simply, was instrumental in this group as a supportive mentor and friend to me. What drew me instantly to Father Eddie was his humility and his joy. Truly, I have not met a person who embodies these gifts and virtues of Christ as faithfully and compellingly as Father Eddie does. The mix of intellectual acumen alongside his compelling persona makes him a wonderful representation of the Jesuit tradition of the interrelationship between scholarship and piety. Therefore, I think in coming to know him, you will see both a scholar and a priest who can help us think about questions related to culture, art, and theology. Father Eddie, you are among brothers and sisters. Estás entre hermanos y hermanas. Thank you for being among us. Share to us what is on your heart. Please join me, all of us, in welcoming Father Eduardo Fernandez.
Thank you, Daniel. My goodness, what a warm welcome. It's been that way all day. Well, actually, since yesterday evening. And the rain reminded me of growing. I grew up in El Paso, Texas, in the desert. And whenever it would rain, we always said, oh, it's a special blessing. So you all must be very blessed in beautiful Seattle. But it's such a joy to be with you. I think the Spirit is doing something in the world in the way the Spirit is bringing us together. And I've just felt such a welcome, and I feel in preparing this, I told Daniel, even if I bomb, it'll be a great experience of having prepared it. And then people promised me that the Rotten Tomatoes would be kept to a minimum. So I'm feeling comforted and encouraged. This is also a topic that I'm very passionate about, and I'm not sure where it's going to take me. But for me, one of the greatest joys of working with students is when they're sitting in your office and you have a master's or a doctoral student, and they're talking to you and you're trying to discern with them what's the direction for them to go in, either vocationally or research-wise. And I always listen for where is the passion? Where is the joy? And I watch their eyes. And all of a sudden, when that fire goes on in their eyes, aha, pay attention. And I always have a pad in front of me. And they go on, and usually Derrida makes its way in. So, so I know they've read, and I don't think I've read Derrida, but don't tell anybody. It's our secret. Anyway, so off we go. Let's get started. I understand I have about 50 minutes. So remember, I'm as Daniel said, I'm a professor and a priest. That's a big danger because both are big talkers. But we had a lovely time today with your faculty at lunch, and I trust that we'll do the same tonight. So let's just get started here on this dialogue of faith and culture, why the arts remain essential. So, you know this already, and let me talk to you about a little surprise that happened to me in '91. I was a student there in Berkeley, part of the Graduate Theological Union. I was doing my MDiv, and it was close to the end of the MDiv, and you start doing these practices. So we had a practice Eucharist. And so I decided that because being from El Paso was so important to me and had shaped so much my own calling and my own community, I thought somehow we have to revisit that place. And I kept thinking and praying, what's going to do it? What's going to do it? So this is partly what I came up with. Okay, these are my poor Jesuit brothers. The things we do for love, right? Dominic Nguyen is originally from Vietnam. He was a boat person, and also another one of my Jesuit brothers, Richard McCullough, who is from Rochester, New York. And I said so much of the story of the way we receive the gospel in the Southwest is connected with the Franciscan friars. So, Richard, I know you're a Jesuit, but this morning you're going to be a friar. So I got a robe for you, so put this on. And then I told Dominic, it was the indigenous people who were the first to receive the gospel in this area. It's most important that they be represented here. And I know you're not Native American, but you're going to do this great. So let's get you also. And one of the things that moved me is that both of them, with their open hearts, were able to enter into the spirit of the liturgy, which was bilingual, which had some hymns in Spanish. But again, I felt like there's nothing like representing the people that make up a community, the body of Christ. But one of the things that really surprised me was how at home I felt. I thought, how could it be? Because Berkeley was that other place, berserkly. And yet it felt like I was back in my hometown, a mission community founded in 1680. And it was largely because of the art that surrounded it, such as this. Oops, let's see. Okay, yes. Whoops. Matt and I are doing a little duo. And am I going backward? Sideways. No? Here we go. No. Okay, all right. Slow down. Okay, I'm talking to myself now. I like to have intelligent conversation. Yes. No. Sorry. Okay. Am I? Let's see. Do we? I think we do. Hold on. I just missed out on. I'm sorry. Okay. I don't know why this thing is. Oh, you know why? It's got some battery, so it's working a little slower, I think, than yours. But it's okay. It's all going to happen. Usually by this time, I'll ask the students, can you say more on that topic? Let's just go with what we got. Anyway, I think we do have a series slides. But I think I'm just a little slower. Anyway, so the idea I had was, I wanted to revisit an article that I wrote. And a colleague of mine, Mia Mochizuki, art historian, loved that article. And so when she did her doctoral seminar with the students in art and religion, she had them read it. And I was so impressed that this little article that I wrote as part of a feshrift for a friend, Jake Emper, who had taught me sacraments, I wrote it in tribute to him. And this is the article right here. And I wanted to revisit it. I wrote this around 2001. And let me tell you why I wanted to revisit it. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I realize now what happened. I was looking at that screen and not my screen. Okay, it's all right. Okay, yes we can. Okay, here we go. Muy bien, si se puede. All right. Good. Very good, man. Do you play the piano? Okay, well, you should think about it. Just think about it. Okay, anyway, back to... was it enough to illustrate the article? That was my question, because I wrestled with that. I thought, okay, I made 10 points in there about why the dialogue of art and culture and religion is so important. But, nah, it didn't feel right. It didn't feel right. One night, about 3 o'clock in the morning, I wake up and I think, no, this is not the way I have moved. Why? While art often can do it beautifully, illustrate, it is much more. Sometimes art is the only way we can communicate something. Sometimes the only way, it's like flowers. It's like chocolate. Sometimes the only way we can do it is with a gesture or a symbol. That's why symbols are so powerful. Martha Graham was asked about one of her dances, and they said, what does it mean? And she said, honey, if I had to explain it to you, I wouldn't have to dance it, would I? So the power of art to speak and say what is not, cannot be put into words. More recent pedagogical technique in my classroom. Let's experience it first together. I used to often start out my class by giving some points, some concepts, showing my students I had done the reading and I had bibliography and I was a professor and blah, 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 blah. Well, I found that it was more effective to have them experience something together, to have us all experience something together. So maybe it was a piece of music, maybe it was a film clip, maybe it was a piece of art, whatever it was, maybe it was even an interview. And so I found that was much more effective. Why? Because we then had a common experience. And we could talk about the common experience. What did that feel like? What grabbed you? And some very rich things would come out of that. So I'm going back to my colleague, Mia Mochizuki, and I can only stand here in front of you because people have loved me and taught me, my students and my colleagues. And so one of the things, when she invited me to this seminar on art and religion, she asked me this question: how do you approach the intersection of art and religion in your work? And I thought about that, and I thought about that. And a lot of this I had done unconsciously, like that practice liturgy back in '91. And one of the things I discovered, it's a way of getting at mystery. Mystery is not something you're going to figure out, like a whodunit. Mystery is not a puzzle to be solved. It's a reality to be contemplated. And you think of the great theological mysteries, the Incarnation. It's not about figuring it out. The mystery of the Blessed Trinity. How can this community of love, reach out to us and love us and invite us in? So that sense of mystery, the respect for the mystery. It's about a communal embrace. People's trying to tell their story. Again and again, anything that had to do with art was always connected in some way to stories. And I discovered that wherever I went, when I saw art, I would think about, what's the story behind this? And I was in the Southwest, for example. I was talking to a santero, persons who make a type of art of saints and Jesus and Mary. And the santero would say, let me tell you why I painted this. Or let me tell you about this certain person. Or why does she have a black veil? She's grieving her son. She's La Dolorosa. So that's a story. Often the stories were biblical. Not always, but often they were. And some of the artists you will see were inspired by the great biblical stories. Finally, it's performative, dynamic, life-giving, even when dealing with difficult situations. What happens when we need to grieve and we don't know how to grieve, or we don't know where to grieve? And all of a sudden, we're in a community that shows us how we can grieve. A very moving story for me was in the Cathedral of San Fernando, right across the courthouse in San Antonio, Texas. There is a custom there of the commemorating the dead Christ. And there's like a condolences given to Mary, the mother of Jesus. And she's at the foot of the cross, and it's candlelit in this cathedral. And they have a custom that people who have lost someone will go and share the story. So this woman gets up. I had known her husband. She gets up, and there's the cross, the linen, the Blessed Mother, and she turns to her and she says, now I know what you went through, because I just lost someone I really love. And she started sobbing. We couldn't understand another word she said, but it didn't matter. All of us had lost someone that we loved. And in that nice dark cathedral, we could all just weep, and it was okay. So some of the similarities among liturgy, art, and spirituality. This is from Moynihan, and again, all of this is in the article. But each attempts to name a mystery. I've talked a little bit about that. We often talk about faith and how we can't quite name it, but art is like that. Each calls us to see in new and fuller ways. Think again of Martha Graham. Each is grounded in the Incarnation. For us Christians, this is very powerful. What does it mean that Jesus became one of us? What does that mean? And again, when you enter into the mystery, how does it take form? I remember presiding at a Eucharist in the Philippines, and they had done a live enactment of the Nativity story. And so I turned around at one point, and there was a young man, a young woman, and a little baby. By the way, the baby was a little girl, but don't tell anybody. So the idea is again, live. Let's do this live. And I turned around and I said, oh my God, Jesus is Filipino. You see, God became one of us. And each is a catalyst of conversion. And you're going to hear some stories tonight about conversion. So an example of how these various elements, liturgy and art, spirituality, come together for me, this is the first example that I want to use. When I worked as a young priest on the U.S.-Mexican border, about 5 minutes from the actual river, we Jesuits have a parish, Sacred Heart Parish. And in the mornings, I would open my door, and right outside the chapel there, the Jesuit residence, was this image. It wasn't a book yet. I chose it for the title of my first book. But that captured me. And I want to tell you why it captured me. Because, first of all, it's very strong. You see the hands of Jesus. And they're rough hands. They reminded me of my father's hands. My father was a mechanic. So you see those hands there. And you see that face. It could have been Jesus from the barrio, just living down the street from there. So you see the face, you see the heart, and actually in that church, as you cross the river, the bridge, from Mexico into the U.S., and you look to the right, is this church right there, and you see Jesus holding out his hands like this. And that was very gripping to me. And so we had to find the artist, and I said, Magda, tell me, talk to me. Why did you do this? She said, well, this is called the Año del Barrio, the year of the barrio, because this is important for us. We're celebrating 100 years. And this is the presence of Christ among us, because you see there in the church, and the church is the bride of Christ. And I said, he's a pretty tough-looking guy, and his hands are really rough. She said, well, yeah, he was a carpenter. And I said, talk to me about the perspective. She said, Father, that was hard. Because I wanted to show that Jesus is human, but Jesus is also divine. So we were trying to get, I brought my nephew into the studio, and he wasn't doing so well. He needed some direction. So I said, come into my studio and let's see what we can do. So they came up with this beautiful painting that she did. And when we had the book signing, she came and explained it. And I said, there's so much light. She says, of course, Christ fills the church with light. And I said, Magda, but what about over here? That looks like downtown El Paso where the banks are in City Hall. I don't see a whole lot of light there. Father, that's your interpretation. So what kind of resources do you use? So visual images, as you just saw. For me, folk art is very important. Murals, mosaics, photography, architecture, music, dance, sayings, stories. All cultures have sayings. And some cultures, because they rely more, are more oral cultures, they use their sayings more. My grandmother, my aunt, filled with wisdom. I remember sitting there on a Sunday and they would use these dichos, these sayings, that were fascinating to me. And this is what had carried them through to life. And often they're visual pictures. So all of those are different ways. Again and again, as I experienced in my youth growing up in the U.S. Southwest, religious art often acknowledges that its presence within the environment does not belong exclusively to the clergy. This is very, very important. Especially for some of us who are from more hierarchical ecclesial communities. And what this art has shown me again and again is, no, we are the body of Christ. And we also participate in our way. So what's our way of proceeding? And what remains is a little bit what I learned about Jesus and his friends in 4 continents. I wanted to revisit this article, and I wanted to revisit my pictures, because when I did that article, I had not been to Africa or Asia. And both of them touched me very much. So you're going to get an example from these 4 continents. So let's start in Europe, here in Italy. This is a mosaic that's found in the catacombs underneath St. Peter's. The old St. Peter's, built by Constantine in the 300s, was built on top of a Roman cemetery. So they just poured sand, dirt on top of it. So when it was excavated, they found these incredible murals. And this is a mural of Jesus. And it's Jesus like Apollo. You see the horses, and he's on a chariot. I'm going to say a little bit more about that in a minute, but I want you to see how the early Christians, this is about 4th century, how they were quick to look around them and see what are the art forms that speak to people. So mosaics were very common. They were on the floor, but they started doing this on the altar. And then doing a little bit of reading, I found out that the way the hair is worn, the youthful appearance, they make a statement about Jesus' divinity in a historical context. When the Greco-Roman culture thought about divinity, what were the symbols of that? That's why it's so important to get into a culture to understand it. In the formation of Christian tradition, artistic expression and ritual have often come before doctrinal definition. We often forget that. It's like scriptures. They were oral before they were written. We all know that. We were celebrating the Lord's Supper, Eucharist, before we understood or had figured out what does that mean to us. We were baptizing in the name of the Trinity before we had settled all these Christological controversies. Theology is the second moment. Theology is the second moment. First you experience God. First you live the Christian life. First you contemplate, and then you reflect, and that's theology here. Margaret Miles writes, the curling vine tendrils of Dionysius adorn Eucharistic chalices, where they symbolize the blood of Christ, the fruit of the vine. Christ rides a chariot across the sky as the sun god in 4th century mosaic. That's the ones you just saw. The ability of the new churches of the 4th century to provide a vivid new context for ancient symbols, a context that guaranteed their interpretation in ways compatible with Christianity, is probably the most striking aspect of 4th century visual evidence. So think about the inspiration here of the Spirit. Preach the gospel in a way people can understand. How is the way people understood this? What are their symbols? And how can you use those symbols to proclaim the gospel? Let's go now to Nairobi, Africa. This is Kenya. Let me frame this. You're about to see a 1-minute video clip. I don't know if any of my Jesuit brothers are here, but if they are, don't tell them. Let me tell you why. We had a big meeting in Nairobi, and normally we meet in Rome. And given that 80% of the young Jesuits are in the southern hemisphere, we decided, no, we're not going to meet in Rome. We're not going to meet in Europe. We're going to meet in Nairobi. So we get there, and the one in charge of the Jesuits says, welcome home, everybody. We all look around. For most of us, we had never been on African soil. And he says, you know, we all come from Africa, don't you? And that made us think. So I want you to see the opening liturgy. Watch the faces of the poor Jesuits. As the word is brought in, you'll see a brother carrying the word, but inside a basket. Just like Jesus came to us in Mary's womb, watch the young brother bringing in the word. Watch the faces. other like, they don't expect us to do this, do they? What is this? What does this all mean? What does it mean? Well, some cultures are more literary than others. A more oral or visual culture demands greater use of these means of proclaiming. And after this experience of us being together there at the retreat house, we went out to parishes, and we saw this again and again. And often it's a woman who brings in the word in the basket, and she's dancing. And so it's that whole sense of how does the word come to us, and the joy of that. This is one of the parishes. From that man in white. This was at an ordination, and they're singing, Lord, take my life, take my mind, give me only your love and your grace. That's enough for me, Lord. And they're singing in Kiswahili. At one point, I looked up, and there were about 100 people dancing, all ages, little ones, all the way to older groups. There was also drumming. But the vivaciousness of that liturgy, the only boring part, was when the bishop spoke. And then they brought a DJ after the bishop, and he woke us all up again. Orobator is a convert to Christianity. He was the head then of the Jesuits in that part of Africa. And Orobator was the one who welcomed us there, and you see his joy, his laughter, and sort of telling us, you can do this. It's okay. Relax. Relax. I know many of you are intellectuals, but relax. You're going to enjoy it. So back to the perplexed Jesuits in NAIROBI. Watch this picture. You can learn. You can learn from the people of God. And so look at the Jesuits are looking. Even this Jesuit with the beard from Bolivia, he really struggled with this. But he's there. He said, look at his smile, his beautiful smile. And again, it was the young and the people there, the people of God there. Art is a concrete way of affirming cultures that have been oppressed and sometimes taught not to value their own heritage. It's a very sad thing, and we talked about today with the lunch with the faculty, how sometimes we were taught that our cultures were not good. Maybe it was, there were generations that were taught, they did not pass on, they came to the States, but they did not pass on the German because the war was going on. Or people who were told, no, we're in America now. So there's a certain sadness there. And what happens to people who have been like in the world? Let me give you an example. So my previous idea of an African Jesus, I kept thinking, what would this look like, an African Jesus? Or where have I seen examples of an African Jesus? And when I was in Africa, I saw several of these images. Some of them are in the churches. This is from the Mafa people of northern Cameroon. And there was a whole workshop dedicated to biblical art. So it was illustrating the biblical stories. And so this is an example of that. And so I thought, this is the African Jesus. And then I saw this. This was in our seminary chapel there. Father Engelbert Veng was from Cameroon. He was murdered after this. He designed this altarpiece there in NAIROBI, and I'm going to show you a few things about it. But it was very different than what I expected. It was done in a very, very different style. Let me show you why that style is so important. One of the things that Father Veng did is he gathered African motifs because he said it's really a shame that Africans are learning European culture much more than their own culture. And much of our own African culture is being ignored or is being lost. So he went around collecting the different motifs, and you see there this Akan mask in the Ivory Coast and Ghana. So notice the mask, and notice who is wearing the mask and whose eyes are open. Jesus is the great initiator into these sacred rites. So you have the multiplication of loaves, so bread. On the right, the wedding at Cana, so wine, bread and wine. And notice how, is Jesus dead? Is he resurrected? It's both. It's the Paschal mystery. So you have Jesus there in the center, close to the buildings of NAIROBI, but something, and this is why insider-outsider is very important. Because the student who used this for a presentation, who gave me these images, said, there was something I never noticed. And this is what he didn't notice. Here is the slum, Kibera, right down here. One of the largest slums in the world, right in NAIROBI. So here is the presence of this. And again, look at the presence of the women. But see Jesus there, and Jesus here. So what is the role of women? Something to think about. Let's now go to Asia. This is the mountain province in the Philippines. I had the pleasure of meeting Cisco Clara. Cisco Clara is an indigenous person, member of the Bontoc people. And Cisco took me around. He's a bishop there. Cisco studied anthropology in Colorado. And so Cisco took me around, and I was in heaven. I was like a little kid in a candy store. So Cisco, tell me about this, and tell me about that. And because the Philippines had been evangelized and colonized through Mexico, he wanted to ask me things. Like, what does this mean? And do you have this? And do you use this word, etc.? So Cisco took me to the mountain province, and then he took me to see different carvings. They're well known for their carvings. Look at the beautiful carvings there. And their way of life, so dancing right here. You see the housing, so notice the housing right here. Stones, they're great stone workers. Remember, you have the rice terraces made in the mountains. So the way they farm that was fascinating. And everywhere Cisco would go, he would do something with stone. Now, he showed me his cathedral. So notice again, ways of life. Notice even the tabernacle where the reserved Eucharist is kept. It has a house like the people's, and of course stone. And I said, Cisco, I don't mean to be prudish, but there's a lot of nudity on that Eucharistic table. Some of the women are topless and the men have G-strings. What would you say if somebody told you you have too much nudity at the Eucharistic table? He said, I would send them to the Sistine Chapel. And I thought, isn't that funny? Isn't that funny? We can have it there, but we can't have it here. Good indigenous art affirms the sacredness of the local community. Again, Jesus became one of us. This is what surprised Cisco. He asked someone to paint Jesus. This is the ato right here. And the ato is the place that's where the men gather and the boys are initiated. But it's sacred for the Bontoc people. But notice there are no women inside the ato. All of these are men. So Cisco said, I asked the artist to paint Jesus in front of the house and the ato. And you know what surprised me, Eddie? He said, who is Jesus pointing to? The women. The women. He said, I didn't expect that. I didn't ask him to paint that. But he knew the gospel better than I do. This is an example. In the churches now, you start to see this. Again, the gathering space, the altar where the fire is and where people gather. And even like in large centers, this is a center where the parishes come together. And you see the altar there, and the Eucharistic table is over here. At a time when there is so much which divides us, art can make us whole. Again, I think this is a wonderful example of that. Even within our communities, there are things which divide us. There are people we do not see, but Jesus saw. Let's go now to Asia very briefly. We're in Taiwan. This is a photographer, Stanley Feng. A little bit about her. The young woman who posed for Mary. Stanley Feng is a Methodist, and he was in marketing and really didn't like it anymore. His father was dying, his father was his hero. And he went into a crisis. And he felt the call to go to seminary and become a pastor. So he did it. And he is very much convinced that his passion for art comes from the ministry. So it's in the context of the community. And then he says, and then I try to reflect that. And when I read the scriptures and I see my people, and many of his parishioners are Aboriginal people in Taiwan. So this is Mary. She was diagnosed with cancer. At the same time, she found out that she was pregnant and refused treatment to protect her child. Mr. Feng likened her to the Virgin Mary because she put her baby's life ahead of her own. The woman died of cancer soon after giving birth. This was taken about 6 days before her death. Stanley writes, and one of my doctoral students is from Taiwan, and she did the translation for me. She said this was a very difficult photograph for him because he knew she was dying. And she said, it's going to be okay. Let's just do the best we can. And so he took this, and here's a close-up. The Lord's handmaiden. Again, photography. In his Dust Icon series, photographer Stanley Feng creates psychological portraits that depict biblical figures such as John the Baptist. These figures have me mesmerized. I don't know what it is. I mean, go online and look him up. But they're so gripping to me. Art best reflects the revelation that the Word became flesh and pitched his tent among us. Note how Mary is an example of one caught up in God's embrace of all humanity, taking on local dress, language, etc. This again was something that came after I kept seeing the art and I kept thinking, this is amazing. So Mary's skin is darker, maybe her eyes are more almond shaped, maybe the way she's dressed in Vietnam, I saw her in Vietnamese dress, or China. Mary keeps taking on, and you keep thinking, well, how does Jesus come to us? Through Mary. So what does culture have to do with that? So we have this classic portrait. This is 1425, Robert Campton, The Annunciation. And this is an amazing, I mean, look at it. Mary has a pretty nice house there in Nazareth, huh? Isn't that nice? Look at that big fireplace and this carving, these gorgeous windows, the beautiful dress. She's reading this nice book. And there's the angel. Even the angel is technicolor right here. You know? She's done pretty well for herself, you know, for a little baby girl from Nazareth. But again, and of course, the lily. Think of the lily. Okay, let me show you another Annunciation. This one kind of knocked my socks off. Dallas. I'm from Texas, so I had to put in something from Dallas. This is John Collier, The Annunciation, and it's in St. Gabriel's Catholic Church in McKinney, Texas. I thought, really? Wow, I never thought about Mary in those shoes, in that dress, in that house, in this suburb. And there's the lily. God became one of us. What would that look like if Jesus came through this suburb to a young maiden named Mary? North America, Mexico and Mexican American. I'm starting to wind down here. think many of you have seen the figure of Guadalupe. It's a very important figure. It's a very controversial figure. A lot has been written on it, so I'm not going to go into great detail. But what I want you to think about is how various forms came together here. So you have the woman of Revelation, the sun, the moon, she's pregnant. There's different symbols, like one of this, encinta in Spanish, to be pregnant. There's also an Aztec symbol here. But she's not a goddess. She's praying. And in the oldest account we have of her discussion with the indigenous figure she appears to, who's not believed, she's speaking his language. So she is speaking the language of the conquered people. She does not appear in the center of Mexico City. She appears in the outskirts. So this figure is very important. I saw a rendering of this that it was very difficult. I had already agreed to be on this panel at Yale. And I didn't know this image was going to be shown. But one of my colleagues said, "You work Guadalupe, don't you?" And I thought, it's a chance to get to Yale. Of course I do. But then I saw the image. Watch. I thought, what is this about? And then in doing a little bit of history, because it came with a DVD, it had a television report. How back in around 2000, 2001, this had been the subject of a big controversy in the Santa Fe Museum. And many people were very, very offended. The Archbishop said she was portrayed as a tart, as a prostitute. And I kept thinking, what is this woman doing? Why did she do this? And then I saw more of the DVD. And I saw these Latinas have discussions about Mary and what Mary meant to them. And this is one of the things that I discovered in my research. And there's a scholar in Santa Clara, Socorro Castañeda Lyles, and she writes, "What led Lopez to undress La Virgen, the Blessed Mother? At age 18, Salinas, the model posing as Our Lady, had been raped. Like many women who had been victims of rape, she did not find support in those closest to her. Instead, they blamed her. The humiliation was such that she rejected her femininity by covering herself up and became an alcoholic. After more than 10 years of therapy, she slowly began to accept herself again, and posing for Lopez's Our Lady became the culmination of her healing process. Thus, what for many years was sacrilegious and blasphemous became for Salinas the opportunity she had been waiting for to rid herself of the shame and guilt she had carried for so many years. As theology moves from a more linear, analytical, deductive way of proceeding to a more circular, experiential, inductive mode, art often functions as the embodiment of this theological reflection. A work of hers which helped me to understand what she was doing in these works, and I met the artist at this conference at Yale, was this one. It's called California Fashion Slaves, 1997. Some of you will recognize Los Angeles in the background. Who does the fashion? Who sews the dresses? Who has been doing this forever? And there's a whole line, you see this woman here, and she's sewing the cloak of Guadalupe. And there's a whole line of women, like the cloud of witnesses that are there. There's also a symbol of the indigenous goddess over here, of the moon. And then we know about Manifest Destiny, 1848, the war with Mexico, when Mexico lost half of her territory. Here is an immigration official pursuing someone on the border. And what I found out consistently in all these Latinas is when people are in trouble, she's there. She's there. I want to wrap this up. Last stop, LA Cathedral, very quickly. This is John Nama, 2002. These are found in the cathedral, downtown Los Angeles. I want to read to you what follows from a November 11th issue as you contemplate these tapestries. The Communion of Saints figure, averaged 10 feet tall, Nava describes the tapestries as portraying strong, whole humans full of hope. He wanted viewers to see the humanity of these figures and feel a sense of connection to themselves. He created the figures to look like people today so that viewers might see that a saint could look like me. Some of them have names, like Elizabeth Ann Seton or Elizabeth of Portugal or Andre, and others don't. But they're all there together. And look at the direction that they're facing. Okay, so, we belong to something much bigger than us. Sorry. One more, yes. This is it. So all of these tapestries are facing the Eucharistic table right there. So this is the baptismal font. And I really didn't get it until I was there one Sunday and we're all processing up and I'm walking to receive from the Eucharistic table and they're all facing the same way. We're all moving in the same direction. And this is a very ancient idea. You see this in the art of Ravenna. Art, especially used in good liturgy, is transformative. And so what kinds of research, just in the last few seconds here, needs to be done in this field? I think we have to pay attention to the indigenous, the survival of the indigenous. Or what were these new hybridities that were created? The shape of globalization in previous centuries, particularly the Acapulco-Manila galleon trade route. So from 1500 to 1850, look at this map. There were ships going from Manila to Acapulco. And were connected to all these places. If that isn't amazing, I don't know what is. How music, architecture, and literature can be vehicles of proclaiming life-affirming gospel and also reveal sacred realities found within cultures, realities which can teach us much about God. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Eddie. And also we have the privilege tonight to have the respondent, our own Lasworth, Professor of Art. Thank you.
Okay, I'm a nervous speaker, so I will be reading from my notes and hopefully you'll look at the images I'm going to show you. So first, I want to thank Father Fernandez for that very inspiring and informative presentation. My name is Laura Lasworth, and I'm a professor of art at Seattle Pacific University. And it pleases me greatly to have the topic of this year's Palmer Lecture focused on art and theology, two subjects I care about very deeply. My response to Father Fernandez's presentation will be to affirm his 10 reasons for why the arts cannot be ignored, through a series of examples. Following that, I'll be closing with some reflective notes about my scholarship as it relates to art and teaching here at SPU. And that's a summary of the 10 points outlined in the article. The arts remain essential because sometimes they are the only way to communicate something, be it a claim for social justice, a truthful witness in recording the horrors of war, or an encounter with real presence and transcendence. I would like to particularly highlight Father Fernandez's use of the term contextual theology to illustrate how the arts have the power to create thresholds outside of the church to sacred regions, where the divine can work through the everyday. And like Father Fernandez in introducing students to art, I've experienced a sense of unity similar to that found in good liturgy. For example, in installations such as these by Bill Viola and Robert Gober, through the art, the viewer encounters presence and transcendence in spaces not necessarily designed for religious experience. As Father Fernandez points out, in the formation of Christian tradition, artistic expression and ritual have often come before doctrinal definition. But if our church rituals become mere routine, art can jar us to a present moment of resonance and recognition of the spiritual realities they need to protect. This is some of the last work that Andy Warhol did, a series of paintings and sculptures reflecting on the Last Supper, Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper. And most people don't know, I mean, it's a kind of a surprise for people that Andy Warhol was a practicing Catholic. He took care of his mother, lived with her until he died, and on Sundays worked in soup kitchens, and did go to Mass on a regular basis. And, I'm jumping ahead. And I think these paintings and the sculpture are just really, really amazing recontextualization of the iconography, the pop images that he created in the 60s, like the Dove soap icon and General Electric. All of these signs and symbols have been brought back in to reawaken the story of the Last Supper. They're really quite brilliant works. There's a wonderful book called The Religious Art of Andy Warhol, written by Jane Dillenberger, that I'd highly recommend having a look at. Visual art can also provide a sense of unity and transcendence under a shadow of violent destruction. As reported in the New York Times, the attacks of September 11th, 2001 destroyed the world as we knew it. But the Koenig sphere survived. The 25-foot sculpture, which was at the center of the fountain on the World Trade Center Plaza, stood for 30 years as a symbol of world peace. In the decade since, it has been recognized as a symbol of continuity and endurance. It's not pretty, but it is beautiful. And it is much more than a symbol. It bears witness to undying courage in the face of hell on earth. On March 11th, 2002, the 6-month anniversary of the attacks, the sphere was located to Manhattan's Battery Park as a temporary memorial. It was promised then by the city and state officials that it would return in triumph to an honored place at the center of the World Trade Center Memorial. Art can create thresholds to social justice by truthful witness. Here in the installation art of Carol Walker, we encounter a recontextualization of the novel Gone with the Wind through the paradigm of the plantation's enslaved people. In contemporary art, film, and music, we have an example of numerous efforts on the part of artists to place their talents in the service to a just cause or a need in our world. And art can be a tangible reminder that we belong to a church bigger than our own region or even our time. This series of photographs by James Mallison records where children sleep. The series, there's probably about, I think maybe about 20 photographs in the complete series, and it's really quite jarring. It's moving on its own there. It's really quite jarring to see the contrast from a great deal of materialism to extreme poverty and where children sleep. The documentary Wasteland, filmed on location just outside Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, we encounter the world's largest garbage landfill. Contemporary artist Vic Muniz works with men and women who pick through the refuse to create art out of recycled materials. Muniz selects workers to pose as subjects in a series of photographs mimicking famous paintings. The paintings, or the photographs, then go to New York and are sold at auction. In the film, they illustrate one of them being sold through Christie's, and it sells for quite a lot of money. All the proceeds from the photographs he creates of the finished pieces go back to the workers, which they use to improve their living conditions, go to school, invest in the co-op, which is the refuge center. keep their trucks in working order, and even build a library. The workers report that the project has helped lift some of the social stigma surrounding their profession, and the Brazilian government is now using the film to promote recycling nationwide. God, it keeps jumping ahead. Sorry about that. Artist Bradley McCullum responded to the homeless crisis in the 1980s by creating custom-made carts and benches suited to the needs of individuals in his Los Angeles neighborhood, a project that might be revisited today. In 2016, the population of homeless in Seattle is up by 20%. Certainly a systemic crisis that needs attention and a solution. This water tank art is one of many designed by acclaimed artists as well as New York City public school students for the Water Tank Project, started by Word Above the Street. This organization started a campaign for creating awareness of the worldwide water crisis. Launched in the summer of 2014, the ongoing goal is to transform the New York City skyline with artwork painted on rooftop water tanks. Alongside the paintings are tours, educational events, and a symposium to inspire fresh views on global water issues. Mel Chin's Revival Field began as a conceptual artwork with the intent to sculpt the site's ecology. 1993 marked a successful conclusion to the first phase of this collaborative effort. The initial experiment, located at Pig's Eye Landfill, a state Superfund site in St. Paul, Minnesota, was replicated field test using special hyperaccumulator plants to extract heavy metals from contaminated soil. Scientific analysis of biomass samples from this field confirmed the potential of green remediation as an on-site, low-tech alternative to current costly and unsatisfactory remediation methods. To highlight this reason, art best reflects the revelation of the Word became flesh and pitched its tent among us. I've selected writer, musician Nick Cave. In his spoken word CD, Flesh Made Word, The Secret Life of the Love Song, Nick Cave makes the argument that the proper love song is one of deep, unrequited, and sad longing. Not only is the love song characterized by sadness and loss, but it is also a prayer, albeit with an artist's twist. Cave suggests that the love song creates God in its writing and performance, since God lives through the words of communication. Once he has made his point, God appears all over the love song, whether as the sound of our efforts to rise above our earthly states and become godlike, or as the light of God blasting through our wounds, or as the way we fill the silence between us and God. And I thought this painting by Patty Wickman was a proper pairing with this point made by Father Fernandez. Due in part to its large scale, it's about, I think it's about, might be like 6 by 8 feet, but it's very, very large. Due in part to its large scale, Patty Wickman's beautiful painting, Passion, invites us to share in a moment of quiet reflection, nicely suited to the start of our Lenten season. From prehistoric times until now, textural pictures have had the ability to communicate with more immediacy than linguistic texts to the multitude of people and cultures around the world. And good indigenous art helps assure that the church remains all-inclusive and affirming the sacredness of the local community. Some of my favorite examples of this are Mexican retablos. And I'm sure Father Fernandez has much to say about these paintings, but the word retablo or ex voto are used interchangeably to denote Mexican religious painting. The majority are often found on a sheet of tin, but they are also found on canvas, wood, or masonite. They are an offering given for an answered prayer or request. The petitioner makes a vow or promise to a holy image when there is a need or a wish. If the prayer is granted, the petitioner leaves the retablo in the church or chapel where the worshiper seeks grace. In cultural terms, they represent one of the few means by which people can give public expression to their anxieties, needs, fears, and sufferings. And finally, art, especially used in good liturgy, is transformative. This altarpiece, The Seven Sacraments by George Tooker, made in 1980, was created for St. Francis of Assisi Church in Windsor, New Hampshire. In 1976, when George Tooker was in his 60s, after the death of his partner of 35 years, George Tooker converted to Catholicism. He attended Mass every day from then until his death in 2011. When asked how do I approach the intersection of art, spirituality, and religion in my work as an artist, I can only echo the points Father Fernandez outlined in the early part of his presentation. It's a way of getting at mystery. It's about communal embrace. It's life-giving even when dealing with difficult aspects of life. It's a way to see in new and fuller ways. It's a way to be grounded in the incarnation, and it's a way to be a catalyst of conversion. And that response repeats itself in my vocation and scholarship as a teacher. What kinds of resources do I use in my teaching? Scripture and theology. The study and exploration of the arts and humanities. Philosophy and visual studies. Literature and music. And film, primarily. I do love dance. My favorite reality TV shows, So You Think You Can Dance. I think that's really a wonderful example of enculturation in a very good way, and a way to level class system in America. If you have raw talent, you can be number one. And what kinds of research needs to be done in our field, in my field? Find ways to implement the 10 points outlined by Father Fernandez in our classes in the art department at SPU. To discover ways and means to enrich and cultivate the Christian imagination and continue to encourage students to explore the spiritual nature of art and design and help them to discover how it might be an expression of their faith. To seek out ways in which the arts can be vehicles of proclaiming the life-affirming gospel to help reveal the sacred presence can be found in the ordinary and everyday realities of life. To discover and demonstrate how the arts can be used in service of healing our broken world and how to represent a culture of caring through art focused on subjects such as atonement, reconciliation, inclusion, and other matters of equity and social justice. Last stop, First Congregational Church of Los Angeles. Whoops. This exhibit, curated by Dan McClary, brings together art created by Art Division students and friends like artists Ed Richey, Frank Gehry, Luis Serrano, Lynn Aldrich, and Robert Graham, among others. The artwork will be installed inside the church and visible to the congregation from February 27th to March 31st. Art Division is a nonprofit organization dedicated to training and supporting underserved youth who are committed to studying the visual arts. Oops, it's just moving. Located in the Rampart District of Los Angeles, an at-risk population within one of Los Angeles' most densely populated and underserved communities. Started by artist Dan McClary, Art Division, he's there. Started by artist Dan McClary, Art Division believes that focused instruction, individualized tutoring, and personal support gives students the tools they need to pursue higher education, achieve sufficiency, and obtain careers in the arts and related fields. Dan McClary's recent exhibit, Everyday Sacred, reveals the painter's deep feeling for human dignity. Christopher Knight of the Los Angeles Times says that Dan McClary is among the finest figurative painters working today. The artwork of art division students and staff will be paired with artists Ed Shea, Robert Graham, your humble speaker, Sister Corita Kent, Lynn Aldrich, John Nava, and more. Are all together in this space. That go pretty fast. I just want to point out Lynn Aldrich's rose window is made of tulle. It's 6 feet in diameter. It's just this living thing. It's very, very beautiful, and I don't think the slides do it justice, but I love seeing John Nava's saints looking at Lynn's rose window. I think it's really quite a beautiful conversation. And then Sister Corita Kent's, God's not dead, he's bread. So altogether in this space, worldly distinctions assigned to artists like top tier, second tier, regional, and or naive become leveled, lateral, and grounded in our common humanity, together under God's roof. And close with one of my favorite of his points: at a time when there's so much that divides us, art can make us whole. Thank you.
All right, now we have a few minutes, around 14 or so, for questions directed to our two presenters this evening. So feel free to take advantage of that time. Any questions or comments you'd like to direct to them? This is your special spot.
It's your special
We've been saving
spot.
this for you.
I was saving it for you.
A little dance. I was just thinking that it's so beautiful how we really need, it's just like when you fall in love and somebody brings out this goodness in you that you never saw. We really need a community to show us the gifts that are there. And that communal presence, especially at a time when we struggle with individualism. So I think when art becomes so individualistic and gets away from the community, is it really beauty? Is it really art? And I again, the connections with the communities I found very powerful.
I'm trying to remember who was it. It might have been, I think it's Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. I think this wrong, but there's the fear on the part of people, particularly artists, I would say, that if they hope protecting their individuality. And he makes the point that the Christian imagination, engagement with the Christian imagination does not destroy individuality, but brings forth personality. And I really love that. I think that's really, really true. The dignity of character or personality is brought forth when it's wedded to a cooperation with a divine recognition.
And doesn't that speak volumes for when we see something in another culture maybe that draws us? Like, do we work together with that community and respect it and take the trouble to learn it?
Yeah.
Or do we just take it and appropriate it?
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference. I was talking to a composer who brought to we have a big convention in Los Angeles for religious education. And he brought a whole group of children from a school, an Aboriginal school, and they danced for us, and he had Aboriginal musicians, and there were compositions. And he talked about, I will never do anything by myself, assuming. He said, but I also had to do my own cultural work. I had to realize what are my cultural roots, so how well do I know my own Irish music, for example. And often I think when people don't do their cultural work, and we can get very lazy because we look around and we see something that's catchy from another culture and we just take it. And I think that's when the resentment is. Have you done your own cultural work? And do you believe in your own cultural work? That you have something to offer? At the same time, in doing that, doesn't that bring out others? Please.
Hi, I'm a seminary student here at SPU. And I suppose my question is not related so much to your content, but as someone who I would never use the word artistic to describe myself, but I thoroughly enjoyed this, and I think I'm starting to understand the connections and the importance that you're placing on art and theology. So my question is, for those who might feel the same way that I do about, I don't feel like I'm the artist in many situations, is it enough to simply appreciate and to gaze upon and to, sort of take in art that has been done by others? Or is there, further steps that I should be taking in order to try and create art?
I think that has your name written on it.
I don't know.
I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does.
I guess my first question would be, what are you studying at SPU? Are you a theology major?
I'm getting my MDiv.
My response would be to just use it as a way of proclaiming. I mean, I think, some of the works, like the Guadalupe piece that was somewhat shocking until Father Fernandez learned about why it looked like that, what was the story behind it. I've often found that I've had some of my most interesting discussions with people who are non-believers, talking about art. Like Robert Gober has a piece of the Virgin Mary. It's a very controversial piece of the Virgin Mary statue, kind of iconic statue of the Virgin Mary, but with a pipe running through her abdomen. And she's standing in the middle of the gallery space with a pipe running through her abdomen, and a staircase, a real staircase, behind her with water coming down into the gallery from the staircase into the middle of the space. And then the water goes across the gallery floor and down into these sewers. And when you look into the sewers in the gallery, you see these hairy legs of a man and debris in the sewers. And the Catholic Church in Los Angeles was furious about this work of art. But I had some of my most interesting discussions with non-believers about the Virgin Mary because of that work of art. People who were not religious, who felt something in the presence of that work. And that's happened again and again. So, in a roundabout way, my answer to your question is, there are times when proclaiming or evangelizing are best communicated through works that are truly all-inclusive. Truly all-inclusive, where, like the sculpture at the site of the 2011 bombings, just the resonance of violence in the midst of sacred, or sacred in the midst of a violent act, all the things that Renee Girard talks about. I mean, those moments are, you don't need to evangelize, you are just there in the presence of the sacred in this horrific event. We certainly went through that at SPU a few years ago. So I guess I would say, take advantage of works that are available in your work as an evangelist. How can they say more than you can by reading scripture alone?
I agree 100%. And I think we sort of, I remember having little fights with God about why he didn't make me an artist. I love art, but I'm not an artist, and I've tried all these things, and I'm not an artist, And I guess what's come back to me is, not everybody's called to be an artist in the way that you think they are. And that if it hadn't been for those who helped me to enter into the moment and to be still and appreciate, such as art historians, then I started kind of discovering that maybe there was a different way of being an artist. I was telling my brother how I have 7 brothers, and they're all very gifted with their hands. Carpenters, electricians, mechanics, engineers. And I'm very clumsy with my hands. And I was telling him this. He said, Eddie, but when we have liturgy, when we have ritual, and I thought that's true. There's a way you have to be present and still and hold yourself and appreciate what's in front of you and see the presence of Christ present in the assembly. That's beauty, no? That's art.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, I love this pairing of art and beauty.
I say to God often, God, why didn't you make me a nun?
Wow.
Second part to that
This is like the gospel, and they dare not ask him any more questions.
is, the other part, you say, oh, why didn't you make me an artist? But you get to do the greatest of the artistic tricks. The bread into the body of Christ. Wine into the blood. I mean, that is the greatest magic act on earth, and you get to perform that. So,
But it only makes sense to me in the presence of the community.
yes.
And I think that's the beauty of this whole thing, that we really need each other for it to happen. And that, a discussion Daniel and I were having at dinner was how sometimes we in the West feel very guilty about our emphasis on the individual. And good that we should. It's not just about my individual rights. And we dream about, if we could only be communal, like more traditional cultures. But then I have students from more traditional cultures. Half of the Jesuit community are from other parts of the world. And they remind me, they say, we admire the importance you place on the individual. Because in my culture, it's been very difficult for me to do what I do because I don't come from a family that does this. So could it be that, it's in this community that we realize, maybe cultures that are more communal need to pay more attention to the individual. And cultures that are more individualistic need to pay more attention to the community. And that's why we need each other, for balance.
I have a question.
Please.
Is it going? Okay. So I've studied theater for years, and I love theater, and I really resonated when you talked about sort of the incarnational aspect of art, and theater is so incarnational because you are actually living it in that moment. But something that I've had a hard time with over the years, and maybe either or both of you could speak to it, is I've been told multiple times that I'm just playing, or I have a hard time sort of getting across to others that what I'm doing is important, or that there's efficacy to it. So maybe, have either of you experienced that, or could you speak to that at all? Maybe I just have thicker skin when it comes to art and things like that, but yeah.
I guess one thought that comes to me is the whole thing we've misunderstood the symbol. We'll say things like, it's just a symbol. What? It's just a symbol? Isn't symbol where we take the greatest of creation, whether it's water, or oil, or fire, or bread, or wine, or community, or a touch, all those precious sacred things, or a flower, and that's the entrance into the sacred, and it's just a symbol? So I think there is this distorted idea that it just stands for something else, but it doesn't create the reality. But symbol creates the reality. It's a doorway to the sacred. I love the Orthodox view of the icon. right? You look at the icon, but the icon looks at you. So there's this relationship. So what I love about, and going back to theater, I forgot just how powerful it is to sit there and then to walk away with all these feelings that end up in my prayer and my meditation because you struck something that was real in representing it symbolically.
Yeah, and I would follow that up with the power of theater to create a sacred space where incarnation can occur and transformative experience can occur. Dr. Kim Siegel takes students, I think it's every other year, to Africa, South Africa, and part of their time is going to see a series of plays. And so many of the plays in South Africa are about the horrors that happened during apartheid in the years following. And the plays are transformative. You know, they are a way of redeeming people, of trying to reconcile this difficult history and proceed forward. If you want me, I'll talk to your mom and dad. I mean, anybody who's... I mean, there is a, you know, it is a vocation, and there is a, you know, how we move in our vocation in the arts. I think that argument can be made. We can teach people how they are viable ways of making a living. You know, that they're not play. I think that was what I heard you say. It's not play. It's a way of making things very real and present. I don't know.
Yet the great organizer of the farm workers, Cesar Chavez, and Dolores Huerta, they found, especially Luis Valdez, who created the Teatro Campesino, they found that if you had farm workers act the role of the landowner, of the boss, it would transform them. They discovered within themselves this power. And I think that's the power of drama. It changes you. It has to change you.
Let's thank Eric. That liturgy means the work of the people, and it seems to me that this evening we've heard about the work of the people, both artistically and ecclesially, and so I really thank both of you for that. Okay, and so I want to thank both of you for that. And one last comment. This evening reminds me why I love a Christian liberal arts education. It brings together our faith with all of the liberal arts and sciences for that matter, and the ways in which we get to understand ourselves in new ways through the various lenses of these different disciplines. And what a gift that is. Thank you to both of you for helping us to see those in new ways. Let's give them one more.